just to kind of understand, there are two dimensions going on here. One is, how do we shape the industry? And how predictable is that industry? In the old days, you might have a lot in the bottom left quadrant, classical big organizations that make investments and that pay off over 20, 30, 40 years. Those are going away. The visionary industries, the ones where you can predict exactly where it's going, that's like SpaceX, they're very few. So most of the things that exist today actually are pushing up more and more into that top left quadrant, the adaptive space. And a few, if you happen to be Google, you can maybe control that industry, even though it's unpredictable. So that's like your platform players. But for the most part, for most people, we're dealing in this adaptive space. So adaptivity is the strategy that everybody's going after. And that's because of technology. Technology is eating the world. And we're preparing, so as a leader in an organization, what you're preparing for today, what I prepare for is continuous disruption. And I'm always setting the stage for our next product or the next thing that's going to come along that we're going to have to react to. So it's all about innovation as a part of our culture. So to be adaptive, I can't be adaptive because I'm not close enough to the actual work, to the actual customers. I wish I could be everywhere, but I can't. So instead, that needs to be every single person on my team. So like say a little bit about me. This is my Twitter. This is my LinkedIn. I'm CTO at Safeguard Global. Safeguard is a workforce enablement platform. We have about a little over 1,000 guardians. Our philosophy is all about innovation for the global workforce deployment. We believe that the future of work is essentially work anywhere, work anyway. So we create technology products and services in order to enable that. So think those digital natives on the beach in Bali. Think hiring your team around the world. That's us. All right, so our agenda for today. So if I convince you of three things, it would be this. One is that innovation is part of culture and it's competitive advantage. Talked about that a little bit already. Second thing is that emergent systems need to be managed differently. So we think differently about emergent systems, and that people are at the center of those systems, that we need to be thinking almost like psychologists, therapists, understanding that people are unpredictable and that you need to have a different mindset and different toolkit when approaching those sorts of environments. So those are the three things. So anyway, to get us into the mood, human-centered design. Human-centered design is a great, philosophy that came out of IDEO, and it really revolved around problem solving. So this great quote attributed to Einstein, basically the upshot of this is to say, if you want to be great at problem solving, the value isn't in your solution, it is in the way in which you shape or frame your problem, your understanding underneath the problem. That's where tons of value come from. So again, innovation. Innovation is understanding your problem. Take an example. How would we think about this design challenge to design a mall? Well, the problem is being framed around the solution, the mall. The mall is the solution, and then we're within this very small box. So it's not a very good frame for the problem. The problem isn't that great. Let's frame it better. All right, sell more stuff. All right, designers, go sell more stuff. How do we sell more stuff? How might we sell more stuff? Yeah, better, but it's framed from the perspective of the mall again. So we're still kind of stuck in that paradigm. It doesn't necessarily give us the context of where there's no movement to the problem. There's no understanding of how it's a desire, it's a business outcome. You can imagine, a product owner saying to you, as a employer, I'd like to, or as a mall expert, I'd like to sell more stuff. As a CEO, the CEO came to us and said, we'd like to sell more stuff. But that doesn't really help us get the movement that we want. And it gets us into thinking in terms of, industry, Porter's 5 forces, SWOT analysis. Not so great. It doesn't really help us much. So instead, let's, the innovation from IDEO really came around, okay, let's frame every problem around people, the people and the empathy that we feel with a person, and, basically disregard our solution and just start from the people that we're touching. This Venn diagram is something that anybody dealing with HCD will often start with. So when you start your workshops, you start to align, what is it that people want? How does technology enable it? And, how will the business run, basically? So this Venn diagram emerges from, first and foremost, an understanding of the person. There's very detailed field guides that have been around for a very long time. When I actually started I had a startup more than 10 years ago, and I had a bunch of friends at IDEO, and I took this as my Bible. And it has some really great stuff in there. It has, business model canvas, empathy maps, different tools and techniques that you can use, and it's all open source. Anybody can get access to it. It's very detailed. It gives you lots of the tricks of the trade to be able to get into the mindset of a customer. It gets really detailed, and ultimately, you can come up with some very surprising problem sets as a result of that. So, going back to that mall example, how could you frame that problem? Communication. Now, you wouldn't necessarily, have predicted that, you'd be looking at an Alexa. But if you're Amazon, they're making one of the biggest bets in NLP. In fact, if you look at some of the market trends for hiring recently, more NLP, they're likely hiring more NLP than the rest of the industry combined. Natural language programmers, the engineers that help to understand language. And so that emerged as a result of them thinking about the problem differently, trying to understand the frustrations, empathize, interview, to get into the details. And as a result, they were able to identify a completely different industry, a completely different platform, with very few competitors. And, now they're making those big investments. But human-centered design, the way it's approached is not really, as engineers, coders, you don't necessarily run into it all the time, because often what really happens is that you end up with these 3 loops. It says inspiration, discovery, ideation, design, implementation, but implementation in reality ends up separating off a separate thing. So you get this big HCD team, goes and does 9 months, 12 months of research, come back with a big stack of paper, pop, sits it on your desk and say, now you can go and build some requirements off the back of that. Maybe you'll even write them as user stories. But as an engineer, it kind of feels like this. It's like the answer is 42. What was the problem again? Why were we doing this? Again, remember, the value is not in the solution. The value is in the problem. And now all of a sudden I've lost the problem. Forgot what the problem was. Now I'm building. I'm just building and delivering solutions again. So I think that this is the reason why this has happened is that we forgot what, we're applying human-centered design to the design process, not applying human-centered design to the development process. We need to merge these things together. So to take a step back, I promise you that this would be like kind of a herky-jerky presentation. Apologies. Yeah, thumbs up. Okay, maybe. All right, to take a step back, all right, have to recognize what sort of domain we're in. We're not in an obvious domain, a domain where it's like a coffee pot. Put coffee in front of me, water, and I can figure out how to make it. It's not complicated, meaning like a rocket ship. With enough mathematicians and scientists, I will be able to create a rocket for sure. Give me enough money, I will build a rocket. We're in the complex domain where there is it's hard to create the same effect over and over again. We're dealing with people. The end customer is people for our products, and it's constantly moving. And so we need to embed that design process because we're in that complex domain. We need to embed that design process in development. There's a great book that I'll quickly plug here that talks about Cynefin. That's that sort of understanding your problem set, sensing, understanding people, that starts to build on that idea. And that gets us to that adaptive space. So again, we're trying to get to that adaptive space. All right. So I talked about the separation between design and development. Where does it come from? Let's assess the problem. Anti-pattern one, outsourced design, right? They come in like these aliens and they say, here you go, it's on a silver platter, go build Alexa, go build this thing. Yeah, and you're just there, the developer, you're that guy with the microphone, just kind of like, okay, thank you very much, appreciate it. That's an anti-pattern. So structurally, outsourced design, bad idea. All right, second anti-pattern, fragile. All right, so you've got your kind of still your aliens there, but you're in the middle, kind of doing the handoff thing, kind of better, not as bad as before, better, still bad. The third anti-pattern. Now, this is the one that this is a secret anti-pattern. This is the one where the product owner owns the backlog and you don't know why that thing is on the backlog. Somebody is just kind of whispering in your ear and saying, just do this thing, just build that thing, right? You don't know why you're building it. So there's the three anti-patterns structurally that we want to get away from. So start there. Start by addressing those anti-patterns structurally, bringing things together. So as a leader, you're trying to create whole emergent system. So not individual people, individual parts, but the whole thing together. And we need to switch our mindset from the factory model, like thinking in which, case when we say emergent, thinking in a way in which I can make that happen. Instead, I can only create the conditions by which that can possibly happen, and that I constantly am tending to that garden, that forest, to be able to grow around me. All right. So here's the three big problems that I see in building those emergent systems. And I'm going to throw a lot of books at you because I don't have time to necessarily get into the weeds on each thing, but I'll give you a few examples of how I'm approaching this at my work, and it might spark some ideas, and you can go off and look at some of these books and get better ideas, better folks to explain it than me. So the first big problem is complexity. So I know I mentioned that we're in the complex domain, but that doesn't mean that necessarily I want that much stuff in my head. As a human being, you could only load so much information into RAM. And as a team, if there's too much information, we'll either separate out into these different pieces, start to develop those anti-patterns, not work together, not understand the problem. It's a great book around team typologies that talks around how you shape teams around problems and make sure that they can work well together. An example of how we're doing this at my work, we're constantly creating new products, new concepts. And we leverage this thing called domain-driven design that everybody here is probably very, very familiar with, to isolate the areas where those teams can share a language, share a bounded context, meaning that I don't need to care about what else is going on. I'm optimizing for what the team doesn't need to think about. And so that's a really valuable baseline. Another thing that's super helpful is it's not just enough to give a team, hey, here's your domain, but you need a way of understanding that domain. You need a way of kind of saying why it's important. And so stories are a valuable thing. Make sure that, when a team is starting up a new product or has an existing product, tell them the story and repeat it often about why that thing is important, where it's coming forward, why it's being invested in. It should be something short and snappy. There's that old saying from Eli Goldratt that says, tell me how I'm measured and I'll tell you how I behave. Put the measurements behind your story, put your measurements behind your bounded context, make sure that the team is kind of stuck and aligned to those things. That's what we're doing here at Safeguard, and it's I could tell you that it's almost every day that we end up talking about reframing our OKRs to be consistent with what we're trying to build. And then lastly, it's about the feedback loops. Building in constant back and forth between executives, your stakeholders, and your customers in order to make sure you're keeping good. That feedback loop just constantly reinforces that narrow domain problem that you're working on. Okay, I know this is a lot, and I'm jumping around a bit, but I promised you that I was going to be spilling my mind out here. So let's move on to the next one, dependency. So this is where it can get a little bit more technical. Dependencies keep multiple teams running together. So theoretically, you can have a team running at one product, a team running at another product. But if those things both connect up to one major thing, you either have, you kind of have to orchestrate that. And what we want to avoid is that orchestration, because then I'm stopping thinking about my problem. And now I have to think about more the delivery aspect. So we want to encapsulate, instead, have the bigger products, bigger experiences depend down on the smaller products instead of the other way. If you don't do that, you end up with safe, and we all want to avoid that. So these large systems with complex moving pieces where everybody has to think about process and timing and roles, responsibilities, and all that stuff, all that stuff gets in the way of our ability to focus on customers, focus on people. So optimizing for team autonomy, again, so this is basic stuff at this point, but we know that encapsulating the data within underneath a tight product or application gives us the best chance for limiting the surface area with other products and other dependencies and accidental complexity to creep in. We also want to liberate data, so making it, to the best of our ability, event-driven, so that systems don't necessarily need to talk to one another, is a great technique. It's one that forms one of our pillars at Safeguard. Okay, and then finally, I'll just touch on safety. So the last thing is that teams that worry about what they have put into production or what they're just about to put into production and don't have confidence in it, reduces the feedback loop, the saliency of the feedback loop with customers and people. And so good technical practices are the first base, right? So if you're thinking about human-centered design, you're trying to eliminate fear and anxiety in the actual teams themselves, and these are the best ways to do it. testability, deployability, scalability, observability. Those are all, getting those basics out the door. I'd say that that's a big part of HCD. The other thing that should be is disaster recovery, progressive release, and rollback strategy. Again, having all these things basically eliminates fear. Having a safety culture, having no sense of fear allows you to run fast and deliver for customers. Another thing that is really valuable as a pillar is to cultivate the right kinds of people. So fear emerges when there's, you don't have the right sort of egoless, careful people that want to collaborate together. And so you need to be really cautious of building an organization culture that's built on that. So this book, The Ideal Team Player, couldn't rate it higher. And you could take a weekend to read that one. That's a fantastic one. It's a way in which also we think about our hiring strategy. Another one is emphasizing and growing relationships. So some organizations focus a lot of energy on what I'll call is like more the logistics of working in the organization, right? We get together and do things for work, and it feels like a bit of when you're at work, you're always working. The trick to an emergent system is that instead of, you want to reverse the script. Instead, the work emerges from the relationships that you have with people. So as a leader, you want to spend less time focused on, are we focusing on the right things to do, the checklist, but instead, are we having the right kind of banter? Are we having the right kind of conversations as people? Are people bringing their whole human self to work? When there is a problem, someone's sick, somebody's has an issue at home, that people are there for them. Those are the kinds of that's developing the emergent system that you want. So it's as a leader, you need to almost reverse yourself. Think less about the work, focus less on the work, focus more on the people. Again, human-centered design is about people, not about the work. And then there's this book that I also love, which is about cracking complexity. So when you have a problem, and instead of going and solving it yourself, solve all your problems together. And so some of the ways that we do this at work, as an example, we run constant workshops, design sprints. Whenever we have a big problem, the whole team is in the room. We involve our customers, we involve operations and implementation, and it could feel very expensive. But it's much more expensive to build the wrong product. And so we invest the time, we invest the money, we invest the energy in working together, and often we'll get much better outcomes at the end. So in summary, going back to this big definition, I crossed out a bunch of stuff. I fixed it. So human-centered design is all about the user. Cross that out. It's about people, right? We don't want to just focus on features and design elements. Cross that out. We want to focus on how we work. We don't want to just focus on improving productivity for the users. We want to think about the whole system. Our engineers, our support folks, implementation, and customers. And we want to develop experiences. We want to be testing those experiences often. And we want to be using a human lens at all times. So that's it. That's my presentation. Thanks very much.
Hey, Duri, do you have some time for questions?
Yeah.
So Duri, your role as a CTO, and you have, let's say, a lot of people, correct? There's a lot of people in your organization?
Yeah, we're over 1,000 people in the org, and then my group is about, between product and dev, we're about 100 so folks.
there's a lot of people in the Canton Coder community, or more people that the work surface writing code. They don't always get to talk to a CTO. So would you mind just fielding some CTO questions and human-centered design questions?
Yeah, sure. Let's try.
Everyone opening it up is Duri is an actual CTO in a real company, and I'll knock off the streaming here right now. But I know a lot of us don't always get the